So I picked this isolated man because I feel that maybe this is also part of the second question. I think that not enough of us define ourselves as engaged scholars. I mean, consciously engaged scholars, because all of us are engaged scholars, even when we are silent. Our silence is an engagement, not to speak. And so I decided just to be an engaged scholar, consciously. But I mean, this is a bit the kind of the representation of my feeling, just to be isolated in my let's say own institution, probably. But still, it's not desperate, isolated man. It's also a way for me and probably other engaged scholars just to reach out to other islands and just to build bridges. So the little card I gave you is just one illustration of my engagement, which is this year I dropped my courses on corporate strategy just to create new courses, one of which being Have a Cause, Have Impact. And the card I just gave you is actually a group of students who just want to spread the smile and empathy. And so if you want to play with this, it means that you just can take a picture and just go to the hashtag and just share this and give it to someone else that you don't know, in the street, in the plane, wherever, just have a good feeling and moment with these people. So I keep it short here. Just what I want to say is just it's an isolated man, or person, let's say. The gender has no importance here, and it's just also, I think that lots of isolated, engaged scholars can create something together.
Okay, thank you. Julianne?
This picture was taken in Dhaka, and it was a financial literacy camp organized for the families of the victims of the Rana Plaza tragedy, and it was organized by the Irish retailer Primark. And you can see me there, part of that group. And I chose this picture because kind of for me as an organizational ethnographer and qualitative researcher, I think I really like to be out there and kind of meet the people who I'm researching, and I think it really changes my perspective. So I think this kind of engagement, at least with the field, comes quite naturally to me by virtue of the research method. While I was participating in the Mela, it's called the Mela, and there was this one of the women, and she was sitting next to me, and at some moment she just took my hand, and we just sat there and we just squeezed each other's hands and just looked into each other's eyes. And it was just such a powerful moment that kind of really brought home how this is kind of about real people with real consequences. And it just felt just really significant and really beautiful, and really kind of, gave a lot of meaning to why I was here doing that sort of research.
Jean-Pascal?
Yeah, so I built more from the kind of French legacy to define my concept of engaged scholar. I don't see myself as Michel Foucault or Pierre Bourdieu, but I think it's important to have people who can inspire you in terms of engaged scholarship. And I realized there are lots of prejudice against French theorists and scholars who are regarded as very abstract and not engaged at all, whereas lots of them have been very, very engaged. Here you have a picture of Michel Foucault next to Jean-Paul Sartre, for instance, the day he was creating the Groupe d'Information sur les Prisons, which was an association created in order to improve conditions in prison that is still out there. So it's a very long-standing legacy that has contributed to improve the quality of prisoners' life, for instance, in France. What is interesting also, if you start thinking about those different scholars like Pierre Bourdieu, who has refused to be engaged for half of his life and who decided to become very engaged in the second half of his career because he wanted first to develop a theory that he could then use in order to provoke or to trigger some change in society. I think it gives you also some ideas. What is interesting if you think about a lot of those French very engaged intellectuals is that some of them were not necessarily engaged for the right cause retrospectively. And that's the reason why I wanted, or a code that has been kind of disregarded from a political viewpoint. So here I also put some picture of scholars like Luc Boltanski advising Besancenot before the creation of the new anti-capitalist party that didn't work at all in the context of one of the prior French elections. And I also use a picture on the far right side of Robert Linhart, who has published this book, The Assembly Line, because for me it's a model of integrity in terms of engaged scholarship. So Daniel Linhart was a graduate from École Normale Supérieure, which is the most elite school in France, the place where Bourdieu and Foucault graduated from. And he decided during the school and in the context of May 68, because he was a Maoist scholar, to be recruited as a blue collar in a plant from Citroën, actually. And he has written this fantastic and beautiful book that explained the racist classification, for instance, at Citroën, that describe a lot of negative practice in the industry. And this book is a very strong testimony of how scholar can reveal or unveil some aspects of capitalism that are completely hidden, usually. So even so, it was done for a very different ideological purpose in a very different ideological context. I think this triggers some ideas about how to be different types of scholars. And unfortunately, I'm not this kind of scholar really, but I think these are they set up the bar for us in terms of how we can think about how to engage in reality if we really want to have an impact on the corporation, to have an impact on the rest of society.
So if I come back to because this is a definitions moment, so it's important that we all start with the same understanding of where you position yourself. So if I have to reframe you, so you want to give your hand to someone, so this is engagement, to hold the hand of a woman, and you want to engage in the politics and denounce what's going on in the institutions, and engagement is a form of isolation.
It's breaking the isolation.
So it's breaking the isolation by giving a hand to someone,
yes.
or to getting the elites.
So this picture is from Blade Runner, depicting a dystopian Los Angeles after a nuclear war based on Philip K. Dick's novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And I thought about that, just because I think we just have a responsibility as social scientists to the social world that we are studying, and to make it the best world that we can somehow. But on the question of why should we be engaged scholars, I'm now at in my role at King's College, this Associate Dean of Impact and Innovation, and which is very much where impact, at least in the UK context, has been very explicitly kind of demanded from academics as part of research funding and evaluation and so on. But to just really reflect on the responsibilities that maybe knowledge creation incurs on us. I just wanted to use one really interesting essay by the Cambridge anthropologist Marilyn Strathern, and she has done a lot of work in Papua New Guinea and just amazing work. And she just recalls a letter that she got from one of her respondents about 30 years after she first got there to study them. And the letter, by someone she calls Bharat, says, basically the letter was asking for recompense from her, saying that, you have kind of studied me and my people, and you've made a career out of this, famous Cambridge anthropologist, and so maybe it's time to, share and give back. She kind of reflects on this, and it's really interesting because I think it kind of suggests that we as kind of social scientists, we kind of harvest or take knowledge from the social world, and so maybe this incurs a debt upon us to also give back to the social world some of the knowledge that we have. And then I'm reminded about another anthropologist, come back to the French theorist Marcel Mauss, who also said, debt in society has a very important function. It creates a social bond. So it's not just something negative. And so maybe kind of the debt that we have by taking knowledge from the social world and creating this obligation, responsibility upon us maybe to pay back can also create, or I don't know, maybe recreate, renew the social bond that we maybe have with the world we study. So that were kind of my reflections.
Thank you. Rodolphe?
So, yes, so for me, I think we should be engaged scholars in the sense that we need to produce good research. Good research means research that can be generalizable and can be transmitted and used by the people. And so clearly, I think the next question would be with post-fact, alternative facts, etc., post-truth, alternative facts, etc. And I think that our role in society is just to voice when actually people use alternative facts or untruth, and just to speak up. And I think that this is part of our deontology, and so that's why I use this picture.
Speak up on the behalf of what? Of the true facts?
Yes, so that means that based on some discussions that we had yesterday, I mean, and related to constructivism or your introduction, I think that the world is not just fully constructed, that you have certain laws or rules or principles to uncover. So I come from more positivistic or moderated positivism or scientific realism perspective, and I think that our role is actually just to provide facts, or what we can call facts, which are repeated events occurring when certain causes are present or co-present.
Okay.
So that's what.
Jean-Pascal?
Yeah, so I picked this picture by a Canadian photograph, Brzezinski, and in a sense that's a photograph which is quite interesting, I think, because it's showing all the things that are hidden in the capitalist system. So the garbage, the quantity of things that are thrown sometimes in different developing countries. And I think if you start watching some of this picture, you can think, and you work on sustainability of corporate social responsibility, there is no way you cannot be engaged or feel engaged. And I think that is played out mainly through teaching activities, for instance. But I think that, as you mentioned before, Diane-Laure, we are here in a very privileged environment, and in my business school, your business school too, we're teaching very wealthy people how to maintain their wealth and so on. And I think I'm not sure we should keep glamorizing the corporation. And I think it's time to look a little bit at what's happening downstream in the supply chain and showing it to them. Because I realize, at least in the teaching context, that so many students are totally unaware of what the stuff they buy is going to. And just showing that, and showing that there is like this brilliant face of the corporation, this very glamorized aspect, but there is also a dark side. And for me, this is what makes sense to teach and to think about if you're serious about sustainability or corporate social responsibility. So I found the work of this photograph in particular especially powerful, because it's really looking at the whole supply chain in a lot of different industries and domains.
So we are now in the era of alternative fact compared with other alternative facts, where evidence-based policymaking and policymaking based on evidence tend to be confused with each other. Businesses become political from a counterpower. So what do you think should the role of academics be, particularly business scholars? So we're in a business schools here, in this new world. And there were the three pictures, and I want to hear from you. So Jean-Pascal.
Yeah, so this picture is actually a picture of a Greek character, Cassandra. And I think it summarized the story of that character, summarized very well our role as engaged scholar in sustainability and CSR, which consists in telling business students what they don't want to hear. That's our core business, according to me. And that's the story of Cassandra, who had the gift of foreshadowing the future, but unfortunately who received a kind of curse at the same time, and nobody could believe her. So she didn't have any rhetorical resource to convince people. And that's the reason why she's always represented in these states of high suffering and epilepsy sometimes. They're doing epileptic crisis sometimes. But I think that shows the burden also of trying to be an engaged scholar. The reason why we need this inspiration. But I think it's really, to summarize it in one sentence, really telling business people what they don't want to hear about how the capitalist system functions, basically.
So if I may, because we have this discussion about reality, and Rodolphe raised this positivism, moderate positivism, and you raised yesterday a bit of a critical realism or social or performativity. So when you want to tell them on which basis, which evidence, so what they don't want to hear you because they don't believe you. They don't. How do you convince them?
I just think that I also think the reality is constructed in many regards, and I think that what people think people think things are in a certain manner because they're exposed to specific signals, exposed to specific images, and they're not necessarily confronted to the world, to the different aspects. Then I consider that our work is also to maintain the plurality of opinion and a form of pluralism. And that's also an ontological pluralism, and that we should be able on this planet to live together while considering that there are different ontologies of how this planet is functioning and so on. So I think I would see myself more as someone advocating for ontological pluralism and the recognition that there are multiple ways of living the world, and to me the key problem is how to maintain them together. So that's the reason why, I think what is not real for someone can be really real for someone else, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. Then after there are some obvious dysfunctionings, but I think they're often again hidden in the very back of a supply chain, and it's important to try to get the full picture.
Can I just add to this?
Yeah, sure. Oh, sorry.
I think there's also debate to be had about to what extent, scholarship or certain types of scholarship have maybe contributed to, the post-truth world that we live in. Because I think, I'm thinking particularly about postmodernism, which, used to be this critical agenda, which kind of, challenged this idea of grand narratives and absolute truth. And, now what we see, it seems to be kind of, the conservative cooptation of the postmodernist agenda and saying, okay, there are no truth out there, and there are no, your news are as good as my news. But it was kind of, an academic position and a critical academic position to say there are no absolute truths out there, which now has kind of, become kind of quite a conservative position. So I think it's quite interesting here whether there was kind of a relationship between this kind of thinking that has been formulated by critical scholars and now been taken over. I'm not really sure, but so I think one thing that we as business school scholars understand is maybe business models, and so I just chose this graph as kind of a as a critical reflection on the business model of news production. And if you think about, there was this virtuous alignment between, high quality, maybe investigative journalism and people buying high quality newspapers, so sustaining the business model of producing this type of news, and how this has been eroded by, Google and Facebook and this whole business of the classified ads that have sustained, print journalism has now kind of given way to maybe more kind of, clickbait and news that are based more on the logic of instant sharing rather than, doing the heavy lifting and uncovering the stories that might be behind there. And so I think this is quite representative of how, the revenue of newspaper print has really gone down, and that of Facebook and Google have really gone up. So now we have a case of a market failure. There's no kind of financing or the financing has shifted away from supporting high quality, heavy lifting of journalism. So I think that's an analysis. Then leaves us with the question: what is our role? And I think we still I think you mentioned this earlier, that we still have kind of the resources, and kind of our business model is still kind of aligned with, having actually the time to gather the data, the evidence, to spend time on, really doing in-depth research. So we still have, the resources available to do that. So, yeah.
So to keep taking the time and going deeply in the data.
I mean, we do have the time. I think the next question is, okay, how do we actually convert this?
Yeah.
Can we now fill the spot of, these journalists? Journalists, I think, employment has gone down by 50% of print journalism, in line with kind of, these revenue figures. I don't know if that's the role that we can fill, because probably, but I think we definitely have a role to play. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, so for me, so remember I said that engaged scholars are a bit isolated, and so we are not connected enough, although some structures exist. And so for me here, it's kind of the picture of a protest. And I think our role, I think, as business school scholars should be to unite, and although to respect different ontologies, at the same time, I think time is ripe for convergence on many of our points of view, just to be more efficient and to be audible, to be heard by the decision makers that first we train, and second, we can influence. So for me, as you said earlier, business schools are at the crux, or at the center of, at the crossroad, or at the center of a university system, economic system. It's a unique position, and that we should use it to maybe show these different realities to our students and the participants to the executive education programs, but also to provide the tools and frameworks that are robust enough to the different realities. And this is maybe here where I'm maybe not completely aligned with what you said, because I think that we need to provide them with a unified framework as much as we can, just to be effective on the changes we want to see happening.
So Jean-Pascal, do you see any contradiction with you, the unified framework and the pluralism of ontologies?
I think, and maybe I will elaborate on that with the next picture. I think it's a question about what are the type of world we want to construct, and I think from an ontological, epistemological viewpoint, I'm coming from a slightly different position from Rodolphe. I don't deny the fact that science produces things, but it's not because I regard even hard science as socially constructed, as many sociologists do in one way or another, in materially constructed. I think science, production of scientific evidence is about engaging with the world, it's about transforming that world, it's about experimenting, intervening. So I see not necessarily any contradiction as soon as you start considering those dynamic processes. And there is the question of which type of world do we want to make possible at the end of the day, and how do we equip people in order to do that. But I think working for maintaining the possibility of a plurality of ontologies is for me very, very important.
So that would be your goal, so goal-based category, purpose. Do you have any purpose, underlying assumption behind the unit?
The next slide.
Okay, let's move on. So do you have concrete advice and suggestions for the profession? There were the 3 pictures. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned, the French theorists and, sociologists, etc. I think that we have the main problem in France is that actually these people developed interpretations of the world, but without knowing capitalism, without knowing the different kinds of capitalism, the different structures of the corporations, and are very confused by this multiplicity of the phenomena. And so I forged this term when I wanted to publish actually a book in French, and these people were simply not understanding what it was. So they were calling me a sociologist, which I partly am, but not fully. Or then they wanted just to tell me an economist, which I am not. And so I said, no, you know what? I mean, what I want to do and contribute is just to understand the advantages that firms and other organizations have because I have an evolutionary model in mind that says that for a given service or a given function, some forms of organizing are superior, more efficient, or more durable than others. So this is simply what I want to do. And so I said, I'm an ergologist. So I forged this term, and actually I used it the first time with Jean-Philippe, with the Pirate Organization. This was the book I wanted to publish, and which is the science of organizations. So you have here some quotes: science of the organizing, of legitimating organizations, of managing resources, and of creating meaningful universes. And another quote on the genealogy of competitive advantages, which characterizes basically the material artifacts that surround us. So I think, and connecting with what I was saying before, that if we could have a proto-paradigmatic view of what we are all doing, as economics have, which is, for us would be probably bounded rationality of factors, construction of markets, maybe a little bit of performativity, and some other type of small doses, and some other elements like this. I think that we will be much more, heard by the decision makers, and we could be more influential. So in strategy, you have the 5-force model that was created 30 years ago, or even 40 years ago almost, and we still teach. But what do we have exactly just to give our students and our participants about the way we see the world and their role in the society? We do not equip them with this. So, so when you ask me about my identity, I'm this isolated man in this island saying that I'm an ergologist.
Okay, so my prescription is slightly different if you move. So I would prescribe lots of performativity type of thinking, and I think this drawing from a share illustrate that. I think it's, to me, it's very bizarre to think about the fact that we are describing a world which is different from us and separated from us. I think it's very bizarre to separate nature and culture. I think we should, and I know that economists have done that very successfully in terms of producing science, but they have also reshaped completely reality, market, and a lot of organization according to their assumptions. So I think we shouldn't be afraid of the fact that by producing science, by producing representations, whatever their kind of representation, they're going to be out there and they're going to add to the world necessarily. So it's not a question of whether you impact or not the world. It's like, because I'm talking at the moment, the world that is going to happen right now is the one with which I've just said something. So I think you're transforming that permanently. And that's the point. To me, it's not, we don't have to be scared of that. We have to try to understand that differently. And I think this image captured this movement very well. Like, at the moment you're trying to start describing this world, you're already transforming this world, whether you want it or not. There is no choice. And I think different types of discipline have been more or less able at transforming the world to their image. And I would see like a lot of performativity struggle, for instance, before different alternative competing definition of what is the unreal reality that was described by Tima yesterday. And the question is, by acting in specific manner, by doing science in specific manner, do we bring about some of those world or not, or do we make them possible or not? And I know it's not a comfortable position to think about that when you're doing your research, when you're doing your teaching, but I think it's a more productive way of thinking about the impact of science and the impact of research and of our activity. So that's where this performativity and the quite the broad, even the very radical definition of the term by people like Karen Barad, for instance, and the post-humanist agenda, I think is quite interesting and at least quite motivating from my viewpoint. So no one is innocent. That's.
So you react, you want to
I disagree. I think that this is innocuous. I mean I think that the world is structured in a way that you have power, conflict, resources, competitive advantages, and that just describing it and being so ecumenical is probably on one aspect good, but then on the other, in the other case, on the other hand, on the other hand, actually, it's actually just being, seated in the passenger seat, and so for me, I want to, with the rest of the years that I still have, I mean, I would like just to be much more providing the tools and evidence that enables decision maker to really, act on the things, and so I think that we need to be dangerous, and what you're offering does not represent any danger for the decision makers and the social structure that is in society. It's innocuous for me, so I want to be able just to show to these people that actually, if you do this type of investment, you may have short-term returns of this and longer-term returns that will be, that. But if you do another type of thing that, with evidence, is more CSR conscious, for instance, you will get maybe lower short-term, but you have a longer positive impact. I want to show them that if they don't behave in certain ways, the cost for them is this one. The reputation scale, the way they will be in the social scaling, the way the interpretations about them and their actions will be different. I want to put figures on this. And for this, I think we need to unite around. I mean, if we are just isolated voices saying this, from this framework A, framework B, framework C, we are inaudible. I mean, these people cannot just hear us, and even if they would like just to hear us, I mean, it's just that they just don't understand. They don't know if they should pick you're saying, someone else saying. They don't know.
But
so
I see no contradiction between what you've said and what I've described just before. I think you're thinking about using science to equip people so that they're going to intervene to transform the reality in a specific manner. So to me, that's a performative process from a viewpoint you've just described.
It's not a performative process
to
a certain dimension,
alternative theories that would
because
lead to
with
different
performativity
actions, so.
you give the impression that anything you say could be interpreted in a way that will have some action and power, which is not what I
Not
believe.
necessarily.
I think that there are some underlying structures that make the possibility for the world to change in one direction or another. I think that, for instance, some NGOs taking care of some homeless people are less efficient than some other organizations. And so in some cases, you need to know when the NGO is efficient, because these organizations are non-professional, oftentimes are just not reliable. Okay, so someone was talking before about the efficiency of this allocation for this project. So when is it that social business is better than corporation? When is it that NGOs are better than corporations? So I want to be able just to put figures on this. And so that means that when I want to be performative, I want just to do this on the basis of a certain type of epistemology that exists, And so.
But you assume that you will be able to transform the world with the knowledge you produce, or to help people transform the world based on the knowledge you produce?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and so, but I think what you were saying about the postmodernism and the failure of this of this field, and actually the backlash and just the swing of the pendulum that these people generated and created is very harmful, and that now we are paying for this very ideological interpretations of the reality that they gave.
I don't think it's necessarily ideological, and I think there are differences between post-humanism and postmodernism and those kind of things. So I think, to me, the fact that saying that socially is constructed through action by people, and that science is also constructed, and that you need organization in order to produce scientific results, for instance. So I don't see that way of seeing the world as necessarily contradictory with the fact that you want to push or nudge to bring into being some specific conceptions of the world. I think to me it's not fundamentally different in this regard. So I don't see this kind of performativity approach as a kind of postmodernist critique necessarily.
But I think what's interesting is that we're having a debate about ontology and epistemology, and talk about engaged scholarship. So I think it's really interesting how these fundamental assumptions that we have about the world and about what we can know actually has real consequences in terms of how we can make a difference. And I think I haven't heard this before in such a connection that has emerged throughout this conference. So I think it's just a fascinating kind of debate to be had, and probably can't find the answer, but
Julian, I put your picture.
So I chose this cartoon to reflect on a contradiction that we face. On the one hand, we have an abundance of experts. Everybody can be an expert. We have all these like fitness experts or nutritional experts, food experts on the net. Everybody can write a blog. Everybody can be an expert, right? And it's also quite comforting to know that your opinion is as good as your opinion or my opinion. If we live in a world where things are so complex that the kind of objects and the technology we operate is so complex that we don't necessarily understand this anymore. So we kind of face this sort of epistemological anxiety, and by this idea everybody can just be an expert, kind of comforting thought. On the other hand, there's been this crisis of experts and elites and eroding kind of legitimacy of the public intellectual as well. So I think that we're kind of facing a predicament, and the predicament is that how if we engage, how do we engage, and on what kind of level do we engage? Do we just add to that noise out there on the internet, to all these like hundreds of opinions that are already out there, which may be fake or not fake, or do we kind of claim there's some sort of different status that social science or scientific knowledge still holds? And if we claim we have this, and if we take the second position, how do we avoid being kind of branded as elitist and kind of removed from the people we want to engage in? And how do we manage to convert this kind of scientific knowledge into something that is both understandable without being elitist? And I think that's kind of a difficult challenge that we are facing. And I think it's maybe time to experiment with different formats of how we can transform or convert academic scholarship into more public engagement. And of course, we all kind of work in certain incentive structures and so on. So I think but I think we have to become really creative about what we can do about this. Yeah.
Where do you see your scholarship in 15 years? Picture came back.
Yeah, so this is a small établi, so I think I will still be trying to do some kind of bricolage and using different concepts, different theories and different ontologies in order to try to build something that can help explain what's going on, while knowing that there is always this part of the world that escapes to you and you don't know what people are going to do with what you're building. So I see it as I still see the type of research we're doing as a kind of craft where, we collect some data, we try to make sense of this data, we hope that we're going to build something that will have some effect on the world. We work hard sometimes in order to connect with different types of practitioners who could be interested in what we say, with the hope that they're going to change or transform their behavior in a way that is going to bring about a world that we think is more interesting. So I think I will still be in 15 years of time when I'm trying to build up some theory or some explanation of some kind to better understand this process.
So it was a really concrete example, but real. You didn't take an apple or virtual apple. You took a. Just want to show you that you took something really concrete. Wood.
Wood, tools. I think engagement is a lot about designing and conceptualizing tools. And that could be visual tools, and Tima she knows that perfectly well with a lot of different tools she has contributed to design through the NBS network, for instance. And I think that's a very powerful way of influencing what's going on. And I mean, in a sense, again, even some of the assumptions that were mentioned earlier by Rodolphe about bounded rationality, 20 years ago, who would have said that you are able to bruise 1 million flights in a few seconds with a mobile phone? So, I mean, at the time of Simon, those kind of things were not conceptualized. So they say, yes, the rationality was really wounded. But I think if you add the rationality that is embedded in your iPhone, that have been embedded by the engineers in your iPhone, you're much more rational, connected to a number of information which has strictly nothing to do with what was there before. So is it still fine to say, well, we can work with very basic assumption like wounded rationality, everybody would agree with that? I would disagree, because it depends so much on whether I consider just Rodolphe or Rodolphe and his mobile phone and Rodolphe and the different network of objects he's interacting with, and depending on how I shape the agency, then maybe the definition of rationality would be very different out there. So here what I mean is that if we don't start considering this relationship with the non-human, if we don't try to integrate that in our scholarship and our analysis, we will have a very hard time understanding how the world function. So, and that's what I mean in the fact that it's also permanently transformed, and that's not a comfortable position. Here again, I mean, it's more like telling people it's more complicated than what you assume, which usually people don't like, but that's very consistent with my Cassandra message that we are unfortunately here, I guess, as academics, to tell people maybe things are not as simple as you think, and maybe maximizing shareholder value is not, the main message and the main way of managing a corporation, for instance.
Thank you. Rodolphe?
So I would like just to say to the different people that actually the world is simpler than you may think. I would like just us to be able just to give simplification, saying that instead of maximizing just shareholder value, you can do this. You can pursue two, let's say, objective functions at the same time, and this is how you can do it, just by looking at this and this. And if you make decisions on these two aspects, then you solve the solution. So I would like, although I agree completely with you that it's very complex, I would like us just to be able to simplify this in a way that is workable, functional for the people. So this picture, of course, it's a bit an irony based on the first picture I showed, where I said that I felt isolated. I should have actually copied and pasted the island with the guy, multiple times, because I think that probably in 15 years, so I will still be on an island, but that probably there will be much more islands, so it will be more like an archipelago, and hopefully with some bridges, so that maybe the picture doesn't look as desperate as you could take it. So I don't see much changes.
Archipelago. Julian?
This is a picture by the Irish artist and photographer Richard Moss, which I saw at the Biennale in Venice, and it depicts the conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And at the time, I was just doing research on conflict minerals from the Congo. And the Congolese conflict is just so immensely complicated and difficult. There's so many different groups and factions that battle each other in like a very large kind of area of the Eastern Congo, and there are no good guys and no bad guys. So it's kind of an intractable conflict that is really hard to understand. And Richard Moss here uses some things called aerochrome infrared film to kind of paint this conflict in a new light. So he, the militias, suddenly they're kind of pink and purple and magenta and teal. And so I think it kind of pushes our perception of what we can see. Maybe a little bit similar to Brian's beautiful picture we had yesterday, where we had the pond and then the freezing pond. So kind of just changing our perspective. And so I was just really fascinated by Richard Moss's ability to, stay true to being an artist. So this is still, totally piece of art, but at the same time, he conveyed this kind of political message about, a conflict that you can't really convey, that you can't really talk about in such easy ways. And so I thought he found this kind of very beautiful, very virtuous alignment, being kind of this artist with a political message, engaged and yet true to his own discipline at the same time. And I thought that's kind of very inspirational, and it would be really an inspiration to to have my scholarship fulfill a similar function 15 years. So it's more kind of an inspiration or aspiration that I have.
Artistic, academic. Kind of. So we're about to conclude. I want to ask you whether you have a last word to conclude this discussion. You want to handle
Start.
conversation?
No pressure. No, I think I've really enjoyed the exercise of doing that. My feeling is really that this question of engaged scholarship is, when you start thinking about that and studying that, and I've studied people doing engaged scholarship in different contexts, in Argentina, for instance, and in other places. And I think it makes you question your own practice, your teaching practice, your research practice, in a way that makes you, I hope, slightly more reflexive. So I think it's really important to do that. And again, there are still some figure of integrity in engagement, such as some of the ones I've mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, that I think are interesting, are very aspirational, at least from my viewpoint, in terms of making sure that you're really doing something that is coherent and consistent with your value or what you want to achieve and how you see the profession. So I think, in a sense, there is some kind of value related to scholarship that I think we need to preserve. And I think this discussion about engagement can be a way to nurture and to maintain that. And to me, that's the reason why a lot of people join academia. It's because they're passionate about something and they want to build knowledge about it. And usually they do that because they think that in so doing they will be able to transform the world. But because we become professionals of paper publication, data collection, and so on, sometimes we lose a little bit the purpose behind that. So for me, this thinking about engagement is really about making sure that you maintain the meaningfulness of what you do, and you think, maybe not permanently, but as frequently as possible about the meaning of what you're doing. So thanks again for having asked us to do this exercise and to give the opportunity to have those exchanges.
Yeah, I agree. And by asking us to put pictures out there, it kind of it was an interesting exercise, because I think I thought about the question in a different way than I would have without thinking about it in pictures. So this exercise in itself was really interesting. I thought what Jean-Pascal said about the image of Cassandra and how this is difficult and can be uncomfortable, I think really resonates with me as well, because I think when we talk about engaged scholarship, it's also easy to kind of glamorize, being engaged in the media and so on. But often it's also being the conveyor of unpleasant news, and which people maybe don't want to hear. And also, if you work maybe together in partnership with organizations, your research won't only say it's wonderful what you do, right? There will also be some critical messages, and that will put us as researchers in very difficult positions. So I think it's I also really appreciated that aspect of the conversation, that it's a challenge to meet.
Thank you.
I would like just to conclude with just thanking you, for having made this possible, and Tima and everybody in the room for making again this conversation possible and showing the different views and takes that we can have at this. So it's just a big thank.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for our guest speakers.